Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 22 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the news today, Joe Biden has selected California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate, and the New York Times is reporting that the true coronavirus death count may have surpassed 200,000 in the United States. Today's topic is cybersecurity, workforce innovation, growth, and resilience, joined by an expert panel, Liza Durant, Professor, Associate Dean, George Mason University, and the Director of the Northern Virginia Node of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, Simone Petrella, CEO of CyberVista, and Jeanne Contardo, Managing Director of the Capital CoLAB at the Greater Washington Partnership. Ladies, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, look, let's dive in. What have the last 22 weeks been like for you professionally, and how has cyber maybe increased in your portfolio? Liza, why don't we start with you?
Sure, happy to start. So it's been quite a journey at George Mason. We moved online 100% back in March, and then watched our faculty, what a story of resilience, the faculty and the students being able to pivot on a dime, putting all of our classes, we have 38,000 students enrolled at George Mason. We did it, and we spent the summer really digging into pedagogy and trying to understand new ways to reach our students and engage them. And I'm really excited that we are already now welcoming back students to campus. They're already moving into the dorms, of course, in a more socially distanced fashion. But we're excited to offer about half of our sections online and half face-to-face in hybrid forms, really trying to think of new ways now to build culture in a socially distanced way across the campus. So it's been, an exciting, the best of times, the worst of times, but I think the fact that we've had to pivot, the faculty teach because they love to engage students, and I think it's been really, really exciting to see the new ways that people are learning how to do their work. Just as we're doing right now, we're able to actually feel like we're together and we're a part.
New reality. And Simone?
Yeah, I certainly agree with the best of times and worst of times. My perspective is, as a CEO, we also had to, in the last 22 weeks, go from a highly collaborative, in-person environment where we were creating things to moving everyone to a work from home environment, which just has implications on company performance and everything else. But ironically, our company does cybersecurity, workforce development, and education primarily online. So in many ways, the last 22 weeks have been, we had been for years now kind of fighting this uphill battle, and we work a lot with corporate clients, less so than kind of universities, but we've been fighting this uphill battle for many, many years around, in-person is kind of the preferred method. We only really want to do things if they're, in an in-person environment. And overnight, that became a non-reality, and not only did it kind of create a situation where companies and clients and individuals realize we have no choice but to go online, but in many cases, we're seeing that there are some real efficiencies and positive things that can come out of this kind of situation we found ourselves in. And so even to Liza's point, how do you blend the best of both worlds, assuming that we come out the other end? We've really had to focus on, when you're talking about online, how do you make it engaging? How do you make that something that people are going to stay attached to? And then we've always thought very long and hard about it, but now we're actually really having we really have an opportunity to deploy that to more customers and then get a lot of great feedback. So it has been a huge leap in kind of learning and adjusting. But I'm also, if I had to take the optimistic side of this, I think that we're, just like in real estate, like we're learning a lot about how the way that we work moving forward, and the way that we learn, and the way that we get ready for the workforce. We can kind of take a lot of lessons from this situation we find ourselves in.
That's great. I want to dive into all that stuff too. Jeanne, want to give us a quick update?
Yep. So I will say I'm an eternal optimist. And so in the early days of this, I think I was maybe a little obnoxious because I was like, this is great. We're all going to innovate. It's going to be so amazing. Week 22, it looks maybe a little less exciting and fun. But I will say at the Capital CoLAB, our mission is to develop a diverse digital tech talent workforce in the greater Washington region. So that's everywhere from Baltimore down to Richmond. And that means working with our region's largest employers and our region's education providers, including Mason as one of our partners. And really trying to, I think what you're saying, Simone and Liza, around the collaboration pieces and how do you still collaborate through a screen? How do you still keep people engaged? That is sort of probably our primary challenge in all of this. But at the same time, as we know, the urgency and the need for digital tech and for cybersecurity has never been greater. So what's been really kind of deeply exciting for me is that our partners are still at the table. People are still committed to solving this problem. They're recognizing that this is actually, when you focus on cyber and digital tech, like these are future-proof skills. These will make you more resilient in the workforce. And so even though it's hard, I think people are recognizing the need for this work and are more willing to engage and to try new things and to experiment. And that excites me because I don't think we're going to put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to imagining new ways to serve this workforce. And cyber is going to be at the forefront of that.
So I imagine a lot of companies, larger companies, that probably had some infrastructure already in place to kind of address, cybersecurity needs, dealing with the cloud, dealing with consumers. But how many people got caught off guard with this immediate return to the office and business continuity? I mean, what have you been hearing from, folks in your respective networks about just how maybe flat-footed people got caught dealing with cyber issues, or were people ahead of the curve, or do they need help, and who should be thinking about it, right? Like, this isn't really just a large corporation issue anymore. It's not just a DoD issue anymore. It's not just governments. This is individuals. These are small companies. What's the lay of the land, I guess, look like from your perspectives? And anybody feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can jump in because we actually we had been looking at the jobs postings between Q1 and Q2 when the pandemic just hit, and then tracking specifically IT and security jobs. And as you would expect, we saw that, the heavy tangible goods sectors were hit the hardest. So if you were in retail or commerce or hospitality, and restaurants and anything in that kind of realm of the services industry really got hit hard. And just from a business model perspective, really difficult to kind of like go and take all of those operations online, let alone being cybersecurity. Those that started to fare the best were ones you would expect in, the IT sector, and ones that were doing things that were already fairly, remote capable or didn't really require a physical presence. What I find really interesting is what we saw as we looked at Q2 is, you see these massive dips and massive unemployment, where in April we hit 20 million at the peak, and cybersecurity and IT jobs dipped by like less than 1% overall nationally. And now when we look at the job numbers for Q2, if you just go based on LinkedIn job postings, they've actually increased in both of those areas. So, and that's across all sectors, but the biggest ones that we saw an increase in are in healthcare and financial services. And you see actually some of the uptick in retail and hospitality as well, because now everyone's moving to e-commerce. Even within the restaurant industry, there's a lot of reliance on IT infrastructure too. So that's been to Jeannie's point about just not only resilience, this has kind of forced the industry to grow, and this is not just here to stay. It's probably going to expand.
And I mean, just looking at your report, I mean, from May to June, it was like 100,000 new jobs that kind of qualify, right? I mean, like the magnitude of it is huge. I mean, I think, Jeannie, you guys put out a report, not cyber specific, but about just the tech jobs in this kind of area where we are in Northern Virginia, in this area. I mean, what does that look like? What are you guys seeing?
What's exciting, what I think is really fascinating, and again, like this is just what we're seeing with COVID is just accelerating these trends, is that, so we did a forecast looking through 2025 in this region. What are the digital tech and what are the tech adjacent job demand going to look like? And so what's interesting to me is we have our tech jobs, which is cybersecurity and data analytics and machine learning, cloud. But then you also have this whole growing, ballooning group of workers that need to have what we call tech adjacent skills. So these are people who maybe aren't STEM majors, but need to know enough not to put like thumb drives in their computers, or how to change their passwords appropriately, or do kind of the basic information security that we know everyone needs to have today. And to Simone's point, with everyone moving online and everyone beginning to use these technologies, these are in some ways, I think, foundational literacy pieces that everyone is going to need to have in the workforce. We just can't avoid it anymore, because when you're at home, you need to be smart. You need to be and you need to be aware of what you can and cannot do. And I know Mason, Liza, is kind of at the forefront of thinking about this, and how do you do the micro credentialing and kind of get people pieces of content as they need it in this space.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think yesterday I looked and there was something like 500,000 cybersecurity openings in the nation. 50,000 of them are in Virginia,
Wow.
second only to California. You know, we are 38,000 students at Mason, 8,000 in engineering, 8,000 in computing. We're trying to graduate as many cybersecurity, you know, knowledgeable students as possible, as are our sibling institutions in the Commonwealth and across the nation. That pipeline is just not going to be enough to meet the demand. And so, you know, we're really focused now on looking at upskilling, reskilling, helping workers who are in one sector pivot to another sector with just-in-time bits of micro-credential learning. And we're also looking at widening that pipeline. So it's not just the STEM-oriented folks who might be great candidates for cyber, but as Jeannie was saying, it's looking at those who maybe are working in humanities or psychology or accounting, and giving them enough cybersecurity skills that they can contribute to organizations in new ways. And then looking also back through the K through 12, this is a big area for us at Mason, not only to tap into that pipeline and widen it by attracting kindergartners and first graders to have interest in coding, but also looking at, you know, inclusive economic development and widening that pipeline so that, you know, many, many people can be successful in the cyberspace. And we've got to start doing that by working back in the elementary school. So looking at a lot of partnerships with the public school systems. This is kind of our focus now.
So just to stay with you for a second, Liza, tell us, so you wear two hats, right? You're obviously at Mason leading a lot of this innovation, helping folks think about upskilling and meeting the certificate and educational requirements to fit these jobs, but you're also kind of leading the task force and leading the node up here. Tell us about that. What is the Commonwealth doing? How are you involved, and what should we know about it?
So the Commonwealth of Virginia has been trying to make significant investments in three areas in cybersecurity. That is research, innovation and entrepreneurs, and in workforce development. And they've invested in the first year about $25 million in this endeavor to fund initiatives in these three areas that are led by institutions of higher ed, public institutions of higher ed, in partnership with industry, government, nonprofits like those that are with us today on the panel with Jeannie and Simone, as well as industry partners, trying to advance and sort of establish the Commonwealth as the leader in cybersecurity in those areas. In the Northern Virginia node, we have about 75 industry and nonprofit partners. Simone's company is one of them, you know, really trying to advance here and working with all. What's really neat about the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative is it's brought all the universities across the Commonwealth to work together. You know, we're not competing for students or competing to graduate people into great firms. We're all working together and sharing. For example, all the universities in the Northern Virginia node, which include Marymount, GW, James Madison, Shenandoah, Mary Washington, Lord Fairfax, Germanna, and Nova, are all working together to look at the skills, knowledge, and abilities that the Northern Virginia companies want to know. We did a survey and got 100 respondents, and trying to map those to our curriculum, and then mapping that curriculum to job roles so that we can help guide students to the pathways to the jobs that they seek, that the employers most readily need. So this is the kind of collaboration that we're seeing out of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. Industry plus university plus nonprofits all working together to advance Virginia. So it's a pretty exciting time.
So Simone, when you think about these three buckets, right, you think about like the government, right, you think about the Commonwealth, and you think about educational institutions, and you think about the private sector. Usually it's the private sector kind of ahead of the curve innovating, and it seems right here in Virginia, like pleasantly surprised maybe that Virginia and educational institutions are evolving. What do you hear from your private sector clients, right? I mean, what are their pain points? What are they thinking about as they're trying to meet the kind of requirements that maybe they weren't thinking about, you know, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 22 weeks ago?
Yeah, well, I think Liza really hit the nail on the head there, because what they're thinking is, you know, there are all these wonderful university and even K through 12 initiatives that are helping to build pipeline, but the reality is that that's not sufficient. Like, they don't have enough time to wait for people to go through the pipeline and come out the other end. And then the other pain point is that a lot of the job requirements and the way the industry has evolved is not particularly a conducive environment for like entry-level talent. And there's a number of reasons for that, but like you see when we work with companies, a lot of entry-level jobs require 1 to 3 years of experience. Well, how are these kind of new students out of a pipeline supposed to get that 1 to 3 years of experience before they even qualify to get the entry-level job? So I see like a lot of the pain points in industry around, we need to think differently about talent. And we need to think specifically around our cybersecurity and IT talent to be more focused on ways that we can creatively tap into alternative sources of talent, whether it's through upskilling those that we have, reskilling alternatives, like both inside the company and reskilling them into new roles that actually require the cybersecurity. Jeanne talked about, you know, the kind of tech adjacent. We call them cyber enabled, because you need to know more than the average bear, but like it is a part of your job. For example, we, you know, in the medical field, we see that medical device companies, which are incredibly technical, they need to have the technicians and the engineers operating those machines understand the actual components of how data flows through them, because they are on the front lines of actually capturing that data in the devices, and then that connects to the internet. So they need to understand more about cybersecurity in those roles than just not putting a thumb drive in. And that's not something that their main skill is not in that realm. So companies have really had to start kind of take a long, hard look and say, what are the roles that we have in these companies? What do we need them to do? And then how do we actually get them the technical knowledge or the security knowledge they need to be able to perform those jobs appropriately?
So people at companies today might be on a path to being cybersecurity professionals and not even know it.
Yeah, I mean, the adage is like every company is becoming a tech company. I think that is 100% true, and it's even more so. Every company is now a security company. You know, like we have IT teams that are having to worry about this remote workforce. They would normally just care about setting up a network. Now they have to worry about the network being secure, because we're all logging in not only from our device in our home, but like an ISP that is a personal ISP we're all individually paying for. So they don't have control of a corporate network the way they would when you're actually in a physical office space where you have the like fiber and the network parameters set up. So that's just a totally new world.
Fascinating. I want to let everyone tuning in know that you can submit questions on the chat function there. There's a Q&A box. Submit it and we'll try our best to get to it. So if every company is now a tech company and a cyber company, Jeanne, let's talk about geography. How much does that matter? We're all working remote. People are all over the place, right? But we have all these exciting ingredients in Northern Virginia, outside DC as an example, with tech companies, data center infrastructure, and so on. But how much does geography matter anymore? I mean,
well, I think
talent and workforce
this is a
and
question.
economic
I think that is the question that all corporations are beginning to ask right now. And we're seeing kind of across the country that a number of corporations are saying, you know, we don't need to have our employees come into the office anymore. You know, Twitter is looking at not having anyone be in their office. Facebook is saying maybe 50% of our workforce doesn't need to be in the office. REI is giving up their real estate in Seattle. So there's really interesting trends here that are happening. What's going to be, though, what is fascinating, and I think we can take a look at online education as kind of an indicator of this. So there's this factoid out of the online education world that says, even when people can attend classes all online, they still choose to attend online institutions that are in a 50-mile radius of their house. It's just sort of this weird reality that people psychologically want to be close to their provider of education or to their work. And so while there will be opportunities, I think, for me, I mean, my focus is really making sure that we're retaining our diverse talent in this region. The good news for us in this region is that we actually do better at having a diverse workforce in digital tech and in cybersecurity than other regions across the country. So when you look at sort of these tech hubs all around the country, our workforce in this region, in the capital region, is more diverse. What I think that's going to mean for us is that, one, we certainly have work to do, and we can do better in making sure that we're thinking about how to bring diverse populations and underrepresented populations into tech. We need to do better, but because we already have a solid foundation, I think we have the opportunity to actually have the most diverse digital tech, cybersecurity workforce in the country. So what that means is, first and foremost, we want to make sure that our employers who are based in this region are able to get the talent that they need, the diverse talent that they need with the different perspectives and the different experiences, and so that this region can be economically as viable as possible. But my vision, and what I think we will end up seeing over the next 5, 10, 15 years, especially with the robust post-secondary partners that we have at the table and the amazing employers, is that we're going to become the place that from around the country and even from around the world, people come when they're looking for that diverse talent. And it's because we can do it better. We're already doing it better in terms of building that talent base. And with the barriers breaking down for how talent can move, I think there's a real opportunity for us to lead in this space.
So, sometimes we talk about regional competition and companies trying to steal talent and so on, but really this is a global effort, right? I was excited, some of our colleagues in our Savills UK office on the research team, they put together a great European cybersecurity report recently and then shared it with me. And they were really highlighting some of the venture capital investment happening in European headquarters, right? And I think it was something like 2.3 billion pounds in the last 5 years invested in cybersecurity and companies, venture capital. How are we competing globally on a talent grab, right? Isn't it easier? I mean, we hear about tech companies all the time that are outsourcing talent to, Warsaw or to Tel Aviv or to the UK. How are we competing globally on these cybersecurity jobs and meeting the demand of these companies? To anyone.
I mean, it's funny because globally, I think, we're not unique in having the challenges we have on the talent side. Those are reverberations that are seen across the globe. And I think in many cases, a lot of countries, you see a very high difference in how countries have dealt with the problem. And sometimes it's based on their own diversity or lack thereof, as well as their size. So, companies in Southeast Asia, like Singapore, as a small country, they have been able to actually provide and create an incredibly robust cybersecurity infrastructure, as well as an incredibly robust cybersecurity kind of talent program for their workforce, because it's kind of contained within the national ecosystem of the country. Another country I see that's kind of touted as having a great source of talent is Israel, who has done an incredible job in kind of not only being a proving ground for cybersecurity talent, but then also a lot of those investment stage companies and tech startups that are getting a lot of that venture capital. The one thing I do want to say specific to the United States, though, when it comes to diversity of talent, but also in this remote environment, while I think it's true we kind of always are going to default to people in our backyards, one thing that I found really interesting in looking at the Q2 kind of job posting profile and findings that we saw was that some of the biggest leaps in job postings were in cities that we would not consider to be geographic hubs for companies that were looking for talent. So some of those examples are like Tucson, Arizona, or Detroit, Michigan, where we don't traditionally see companies tap into talent in those areas because they are geographically headquartered in some other area. But now you can actually identify talent in potentially more diverse populations who may not have had the opportunity or the desire to relocate for a position. And from a company perspective, that's actually a benefit too, because at least in the cybersecurity and IT sectors, the salary requirements have become like they're in some cases untenable. So this is kind of a way to actually not only bring more diversity into the field, but not necessarily focus on just those incredibly expensive kind of geographic hubs like in San Francisco or New York or even, the DC area.
How do you think about all that, Jeanne? I mean, how much of your work are you spending dealing with the companies or dealing with the educational institutions or dealing with the governments? I mean, how are you kind of triaging your day, your efforts, and where do you need more energy and support, you think?
Yep. So our region is unique because it has that federal influence too. So that is kind of a unique perspective for us. We primarily are working with our employers and our post-secondary education partners. We also work with 5 K-12 jurisdictions in the region. And really our focus is on maintaining the talent here and growing the talent base here. I think we all are recognizing, so both Simone and Liza were saying, like we have the good news, bad news of this. Like the bad news is we need a lot of people to be working in cybersecurity and other digital tech fields. The good news is there's plenty of work to go around. And so you don't actually have to compete quite the same way when it comes to thinking through how do we produce this talent, because there's such an overwhelming urge. This was actually why the Capital CoLAB at the Greater Washington Partnership started with digital tech. Sometimes it's hard to do these large scale collaborations where you're bringing in so many employers and so many education providers. But digital tech was just a big enough challenge, and it was an acute enough need for all of our employers that everyone said, you know what, we're willing to double down on this because we think that we can all invest here, make a difference, and still have extra needs. So it gets, I mean, certainly there's a lot of work to be done. And what we see happening right now that I think is a really interesting dimension of us being all virtual thanks to COVID, and also just very real shifts in the way that employers and educators are working together, is this component of kind of work-based learning, internships, apprenticeships, all of those ways that, as you talk about some people needing 1 to 3 years experience in order to be able to actually come into these jobs, can you offer opportunities for students along the way while they're enrolled in college, so that when they actually graduate college, they have sort of those mandatory years of experience under their belt as well. And I think we're seeing some pretty exciting innovations in that space. So exciting practicum opportunities that are all online that are highly scalable. So for us at the partnership and at the CoLAB, when we think about how do we help move this region broadly, we're looking to engage 45,000 people by 2025. So I love all these smaller programs that are offering internships and trying to figure out how to move students, but we have to think broadly, and how can we use technology to be able to provide asynchronous opportunities and experiences to make sure that first and foremost, and I see the question from the person at the Salvation Army, first and foremost, how do you engage young people early so that they actually have career awareness in cybersecurity? So this is both like, how do you solve the acute problem right this second, but also how do you take the long game approach and make sure you're bringing people in? And what excites me is that we're seeing there's so many different types of employers in this space, and many of them are equipped to operate differently with students that are engaged in various points in their education. So some offer internships, some offer career talks, some offer virtual tours of their plants, some offer a day in the life of Simone and see how she answers emails for, 8 hours a day. But there's all these ways that you can now use technology to entice people into this space. And I think employers are more willing to engage in that kind of work because it doesn't always have to be just that 9-week internship.
Yeah. So Liza, take us through the next 5 years, right? How are things going to evolve at Mason in your offerings, the certificate programs, partnering with corporations for internships? How is academia going to evolve? And also give us a little bit of an insight about what's happening with Mason and your innovation center that you're building in Arlington. And you're really leaning into this as a kind of, largest research institution in the Commonwealth, right?
That's right. It's an exciting time at Mason. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at these new ways of learning, these micro-credential efforts, just-in-time upskilling for our students as well as the external community. For example, we have a multidisciplinary certificate in cybersecurity. So it combines understanding of law, policy, as well as technology fundamentals, and it can be completed in a short amount of time. Either our students can add that to their degree program, or the external community can avail themselves of that sort of opportunity and leverage the multidisciplinary expertise of a university. That is the power of universities. We're not just one thing or another, but we are, all the disciplines brought together with the same objective. In our cloud area, cloud becoming such an important area, we have a number of new first in the nation degree pathways in cloud computing, with a focus on cloud security, of course, because of our region that really drives that emphasis and working with industry partners. So the next 5 years, we're really focused on working with industry and government to try and understand what those next emerging technologies and challenges are going to be, and to try and develop curriculum, both the traditional degree programs, as well as these smaller micro-credentialing efforts to help meet those needs. In terms of infrastructure, there's the consideration of programs, and we're also launching the first School of Computing in the Commonwealth in 2021 that will help us increase the number of students who graduate with computer engineering, computer science degrees as part of the Commonwealth's investment in increasing those degrees as part of the HQ2 deal to bring Amazon to Northern Virginia. So as part of that, there's the development of the talent shed, and then there's a need for development of facilities to support that talent shed. And so we are developing a new 500,000 square foot innovation building on our Arlington campus as part of our Arlington campus expansion. It'll be the nexus of all that we do in digital innovation. And then we're doing it as a P3. So not your typical academic building, but we're doing it with a developer partner. And a considerable amount of that space will be devoted to partners working in the digital innovation space. So we can bring that diversity of thought together that we know provides for innovation and also has a positive impact on the economic development. We hope then that will be an anchor or beacon to other companies coming into that Roslyn-Ballston corridor to hopefully grow up an innovation district in partnership with the other universities, with Marymount, with UVA, with Virginia Tech, all working together. And then the idea is that that innovation district will also be a beacon to the other innovation districts growing over at the University of Maryland, in the Golden Triangle at GW, over a national landing at Virginia Tech, so that really we elevate the entire region with these small efforts and trying to connect those dots. So we're really actively now interviewing stakeholders and working with folks like with Jeanne and Simone to try and understand really how to build an innovation district in the region, but how to do so thinking about inclusive economic development. And I think, you know, as you were just speaking, Jeanne, a minute ago, you know, about how diverse the workforce is in Virginia. Again, if we look back to try and expand that pipeline, we have to be careful and thoughtful, because there are so many folks, especially now with COVID, who don't have access to good bandwidth, to computers. And so as we try to bring the K through 12 students along, and even our Mason College students, some of them don't have access to safe places where they can do their work online all the time. And we really need to be cognizant about enabling everyone to have the ability to be successful in tech, regardless of their resources and wherewithal. And so that's an area that I think needs more thought leadership and investment from large corporations and small corporations. They want the talent. We need them to support the development of this diverse tech force.
And Jeanne, I mean, this must be music to your ears, obviously, right? This is what you're kind of working on every day. And just give us a little bit more insight, Jeanne. What are you seeing about the diversity available here? I mean, is it we have the talent, we have them, but they're just not in the right sector. They're not prioritizing cyber tech jobs. I mean, how do we expand?
I think that what we see in this workforce when it comes to cybersecurity and the tech workforce is not, frankly, all that different from what we see around the country and around the world, which is that people who traditionally haven't worked in these spaces don't see themselves as being able to work in these spaces. And so it becomes, but to your point earlier, Ken, I mean, we actually know that there's quite a body of people who are pretty close to being able to work in these spaces. And so there again is this two-pronged challenge, which is how do we make sure people self-identify and will opt into these pathways? So what are the engagements and the opportunities we put in front of them kind of along their educational pathway? And once they're not in education anymore, how do we convince them to stay engaged or be engaged in this work? So there's that piece of it that we really need to think about. But I think there's also just this piece of we're going to have to change the way we do some things. We're going to have to make sure, there's a great stat that McKinsey came out with that talked about diversity and inclusion. And they said the funny thing is that everyone puts D&I together. So you sort of say DNA, D&I, and it's like all one thing, but diversity is actually one piece of work and inclusive workplaces is another piece of work. And so there's a and what they said is that 80% of the work done in D&I is really diversity work and trying to bring a diverse population in, and only 20% is what you do once that diverse population is in the workforce to make sure that they're willing to stay there. So I think that's going to be really incumbent on our employers. And I will say, I see a real willingness from employers to engage in these really hard kind of fundamental questions about what do we need to do and how do we personally need to shift as workplaces, as employers, as people with public missions also. They care about this world. Like, how do we talk about what it is we do and how do we walk the walk? So we're seeing more of that. I think that it will be incumbent on all of us as we move forward to continue to do this hard work, this hard inclusion work, because if we don't make spaces and create a workforce that diverse populations want to participate in, then we're never going to crack this nut. And so we're actually going to have to do that hard work.
And Simone, it seems like your process is really employer driven, right? You're helping employers kind of reevaluate and think how they can maybe even use the existing workforce they have, right? I mean, like, so what are you seeing in terms of your advice to employers? I mean, as they kind of think about how do they meet this, do they have to go outside? Can they utilize resources and talent inside that maybe they didn't even know was there, kind of?
I think that one of the biggest themes every time that I talk with an employer that we're working with is how they are starting to think more innovatively about talent and start to move away from a short-term perspective, which is I have a job opening or a requisition I need to fill. Who or where is the talent that I need to fill that right now? And instead, because again, we know that the demand is outpacing the supply. So that's just not going to be an effective strategy. And so how do we start to move them into a longer term strategy, which is I need to be an active participant in growing and actually filling these positions myself, not only through pipeline, but either engaging with the community, the collaborative, the initiatives that are around me, but how can I actually be invest in my people as a part of my security strategy. And that involves ongoing education, that involves making sure that you understand not only the roles you have, but the skills that are required for people to be effective in the roles you want them to be, and then be able to, whether it's through university partnerships or apprenticeships or rotations within the company, be able to actually move people in and give them a shot in those roles without requiring them to have all the requisite experience that they would need to necessarily fill that role from the outside and externally. And I think there are many, many companies that are taking a really proactive stance and get it, but it's by far the hardest conversation to have because that is fundamentally a different model than we have had to date. The prevailing, understanding up until this point and up until COVID was that I employ and I have jobs and I wait for some external party, whether it's through vocational training or higher university, they're going to create my talent for me. And the reality is it's no longer just someone's going to create the talent for me and I plop them in, because employers are also creating, these are new jobs and roles that in some cases didn't exist 5 years ago or 2 years ago. So it's an unfair requirement to say that there's going to be a mechanism to bring someone up through K through 12 to be an advanced threat hunter when we didn't have that role 3 years ago. Like it just evolved. So, you've got to kind of work backwards and say, how do we blend these things together and invest in, upskilling some of the people we have, or taking someone out of the compliance department who needs to know cybersecurity because we have governance functions that need to happen. And those are actually incredibly, they have a baseline of skills that can help our company in these security functions, but we never necessarily thought about actually making them into cyber positions before.
So real quick, let's talk about the big gorilla in the room in the region, right? We've talked about education, the Commonwealth, employers, nonprofits, federal government, right? Simone, you spent some time working in the federal government at DOD. What role, two-part question, because we had a question come in just now asking about security clearance, right? And so many folks, I think, associate these types of roles as needing security clearance, being able to go to a MITRE or a Northrop if you don't have clearance. How do you get these jobs? What we're hearing today is there's going to be a lot of cyber-related jobs that don't necessarily require clearance. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But also, Simone, what role does the federal government have to play in terms of innovating and addressing cyber issues and preparing a global workforce and national security vulnerability and threats? And you have 30 seconds, but
right.
Much you can squeeze in there.
Well, so a significant one, and I'll start by pointing out that the federal government, and this has now been going on for over 5-6 years, through NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, cybersecurity is the only area where NIST has actually researched and published a workforce framework of cybersecurity roles. And so the federal government, for a long time running now, has actually kind of taken the horns to kind of create those standards and try and develop a common lexicon by which both federal agencies as well as private sector companies can use when they think about the cybersecurity workforce. What I'll just kind of quickly say when it comes to the clearances and then getting jobs in there, this is where I think Liza's point around and Jeanne's point around, there are lots of great small individual efforts and we need to kind of think about them at scale, but in the interim, we're trying to stitch them together. And I think that's where there are some really interesting and innovative programs that are happening through organizations like the Partnership for Public Service, where they're actually partnering with universities who are actually graduating students, federal agencies who are committing to, hire these graduates for 2 years, make sure they get their clearances if that's required. And then at the end of their 2 years of federal service, those applicants are able to actually apply for private sector employment with corporate partners. And I know that 3 of them are Microsoft, Workday, and why am I blanking on the third? So I apologize. Oh, MasterCard. And so, you know, and there's a debt forgiveness component there too. So there's a loan forgiveness. So those are some really bold initiatives that I think kind of bring all those things together. They're small and they're just starting. And I think then the next stage is going to be, how do they expand? How do we actually kind of bring those to scale to kind of meet Jeanne's point, which is like, there's some great initiatives out there, but the federal government has a massive role to play.
Excellent. Well, we love Max Steyer here at Coffee with Ken, just so you know. So, Liza?
Yeah, I wanted to share that, you know, this idea of security clearances, you know, it's a challenge for just newly graduated students as well. You know, how are they going to be able to jump into a job where there's a clearance? And a couple of years ago, we began a clearance readiness program and a clearance candidate program. So we're starting with first-year students rather, to help them understand what it means to work and live as a secured, you know, a cleared person, lifestyle choices, how to manage social media, connections, international connections, and so on as they move through. And we have a clearance candidate program where we're working with industry and government partners and identifying cohorts of students, helping them move through the paperwork process. And then they're able to put them on internships part-time in those positions, and they're able to sponsor them for their clearance so that they're ready fully to be cleared when they graduate. And this has been a great model for how, again, to increase the pipeline of cleared employees. But you have to have companies and the government begin back in that first and second year or at the community colleges. So I just wanted to share that with you all. I think that's a model that industry should be really looking at. You know, often they just want our fully baked graduates to join them. But the problem is there's such competition for those students, the US citizens that can qualify for those jobs, that by the time they clear them a couple of years into the workforce, they're ready to leave and go to another company. If you start with them as first-year, second-year students in college, and you build that relationship and the culture of your firm, your company, they become more, you know, they pledge allegiance to that company and feel more invested and are likely to stay longer. And for us, that means stay in the region, which is exactly what we want.
Right. And Jeanne, any thoughts on the role of the federal government? Any closing thoughts?
So the federal government in this region, more than almost any other region in the country, needs to be at the table on helping to guide this. And so I think Simone's point about the NICE framework and making sure that we're paying attention to that, making sure that we're also pushing the federal government, frankly, to update these frameworks as often as they need to. I think that is one of the realities, that when we do this work, we know that tech is changing so quickly. And so for the federal government to be as an effective partner as possible in helping to drive the conversation, making sure that they're working at the pace that industry needs them to work at too. I do love these conversations about making the boundaries a little more porous between all of them. I think that's sort of the name of the game when it comes to employment in the future. We know that people have less allegiance to individual companies. And so we need to expect that people are going to be moving between the federal government and between industry. And so we need to prepare them and prepare both our companies and our federal government for that, and develop systems that allow that permeability to happen. Let's just recognize it as the new normal.
Yeah.
And plan to work for that and develop education systems and knowledge, skills, and abilities that can cross those boundaries.
Well, look, I think we're just scratching the surface on all the topics associated with this, from vulnerabilities that exist for all companies and individuals, from cyber threats and attacks in general, to the growing need of companies to meet these demands and find talent in educational institutions and the federal government. So I appreciate all 3 of you being on here. It's so wonderful to see you. And I mean, keep up the amazing work that you're all doing.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you.
Those are the best. Well, look, everyone listening in, thank you for tuning in. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be Tuesday, August 25th. We're going to have Clarence Anthony, the CEO of the National League of Cities, talking about why cities matter. So please remember, practice social distancing, wash your hands, and wear a mask. Thanks so much. See you ladies later.
Bye.
Bye.